Hello and welcome to the history of the Metacrisis. Today I have the great pleasure of hosting a dear friend, Erin Remblance. Erin is a very active advocate for resilience and degrowth. She is based in Sydney, Australia. She's a mother of three. And her journey as an advocate for degrowth and regeneration, she says, began when she read Jason Hickel's book, Less is More, How Degrowth Will Save the World, over 2 years ago. She's passionate about rethinking our growth-based worldview and finding sustainable alternatives. Her business experience is quite extensive. She started her career in business, accumulating over a decade of experience in a blue chip FMCG, if I'm right, Erin, corporation in Sydney and then London. However, she grappled with reconciling the growth-focused objectives of her work with the ecological crises that were increasingly impossible to ignore. She currently runs the Rebis Network, which she co-created with Ryan James, and includes a seminar that they gave the last 2-3 weeks, for which we want to talk, concerning the tipping points and what are the social tipping points that we are searching for in order for our societies to reach the necessary decisions and the necessary conclusions that the meta-crisis demands. So, Erin, welcome to our podcast and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
It's a great pleasure for me also. Let's start by telling us who you are, where you're based, what your life trajectory was, and how you came to get yourself involved with the subjects like degrowth, resilience, re-energizing the earth. What were the push buttons that pushed you to this trajectory?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if many people who knew me, say, as a teenager or in my 20s, would have suspected that I'd end up doing what I'm doing. Like, it's a pretty big turnaround for someone who studied business, worked in fast-moving consumer goods, was an account manager who's like, when you're an account manager, you're just focused on growth day in, day out, year after year after year. And, like I was good at it. I enjoyed it. It was fine work. Sort of meaningless, but beyond that, otherwise it was good. And like, sort of in those earlier decades of my life, I was probably more materialistic, much more materialistic than I am now. And I thought that having a good life meant having the house and the holidays and those things. But part of me is also not surprised that I've ended up here, because I have a very strong sense of justice, I think, and doing the right thing. And so when I had my children and I didn't return to full-time work, I worked part-time, but I haven't returned to full-time work since having my eldest 10 years ago, it's given me a bit more space to understand what's going on in the world. Like, I sort of wasn't really, I must have been under a rock, because I didn't really know what was going on when I was working full-time. And also having children makes you really like viscerally aware of the injustice that we're leaving to them in the way that we're generating the planet. And so I guess I was focused on my kids, and I just couldn't reconcile caring about them day in, day out, and also not caring about, the harm that we're doing to the planet and what we're leaving them. So for me, it's almost just part of being a good mom, is really just wanting to set, and it's not just my children. Like, I feel the injustice for all of our children and the next generation, and it's part of what drives my work. So yeah, like, it's a bit of a surprise that I'm here, but it's also probably, part of who I am, that I'm here as well. Yeah.
So you think that actually motherhood was a kicker for you?
Yeah, and it's, we hear the same sort of thing when we have people come on to our Rebiz course. There's lots of new mums who go, like, actually, I get it now. Like, this is actually really important, and I want to be a part of the solution and not a part of the problem anymore. So yeah, a lot of it is motherhood, and not in a horrible way. Like, I wasn't aware beforehand, and I was probably more selfish before I had kids. Like, I guess motherhood does change you. Yeah, so like the moment, and I still remember sorry to interrupt, I still remember for the moment I was aware. I was eating less meat and fish because I understood the impacts of those actions. And like I was aware that, you know, by the time my eldest was like 35, there'd be barely any fish left in the ocean. Some of these horrible facts that you hear about. I knew this. But when my youngest, who's now 5, was 5 weeks old, I was pacing the hallway in my house I was wearing her, and I was at the time reading an article on my phone. It was just after the IPCC special reporting to 1.5 degrees of warming had been released, and it was an article in the New Yorker magazine, by David Wallace Wells, who's also written The Uninhabitable Earth. And the article was titled, "The UN says climate genocide is coming. Actually, it's worse than that." And I was reading it, and I was like, my jaw was dropping, and I was just like, what on earth? I thought someone was looking into this. Like, I knew the Paris Agreement had been signed. You sort of hear that we're doing things, we've got targets or whatever. And that was the moment. So that was 5 years ago, 5 and a bit years ago, where I decided that actually I need to be more active in this space and not turn a blind eye to it and pretend it's not happening. And that's where my activism began. And for a long time it was climate, like it was all about climate. I had climate tunnel vision. And then I read some stuff about growth, including Jason Hickel's Less is More, How Degrowth Will Save the World. And it's been more about our ecological and the metacrisis since then. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, that is quite an interesting line you have had till now. And you've been to the two end points of this discussion. One is business, growth, and now you have become a degrowth advocate.
Degrowth.
And you have a strong pen. I have to make a little bit of a disclaimer here. We came to meet because of a text of yours. Well, I read a lot. The viewers know that. And you're the Capitalizing Our Minds paper. It's 2 years ago that you wrote it. It's quite a shock for people that are familiar with the subject, but also for people that are quite new to the subject of degrowth, because you're making a very strong argument there that if we're not going to change our minds, nothing is going to change. Our minds are creating the human behavior, and we have educated ourselves, or the societies have educated ourselves to have a capitalized mindset. Please walk us through in this kind of thinking of yours.
Yeah, sort of, you start learning about the harm associated with growth, and then you're sort of like, and also that growth isn't going to solve all the problems that we claim it is. Like, growth can't alleviate poverty, and certainly not without putting those people who are currently in poverty in, ecological distress because of the way that growth harms the environment in which we exist. And so you sort of kind of constantly going, well, why are we doing it? And how do we get away from doing it? And the solution for me was to change our mindsets and the culture around growth. And to do that, you have to unpick the reasons we think growth is good in the first place, and the things that we think and the things that drive this growth culture as well. So this idea that nature is a resource, like it's not, you only think that if you're about to use it to sell something, to make some money off it, to create some growth. Otherwise, nature exists because it's nature. In that piece, I go through the different reasons, like that more is better, and some artificial scarcity, and some ideas around empathy that I think is diminishing in our society, and just trying to really make people aware that sometimes there's underlying assumptions in a culture that we don't even question because we don't even see them. So I was just trying to bring to the light some of these assumptions that we don't even know are there, and help people realize that there's another way to look at the world.
Well, scarcity was in our everyday life for quite some thousands of years. We were part of nature. But during the last 150 to 200,000 years, 200 years, we have found cheap sources of energy, fossil fuels. Yeah. And that gave us a boost. That pushed us to the historic period called the Great Acceleration. We see the population boomed, economies boomed, wars boomed, good and bad things boomed. But right now, we see the consequence of these booms. And we are moving from the great acceleration to the great simplification, a lot of people are saying. What's your take, and what do you think this change, this fundamental change will mean for our societies, for our social orders, for our political system, for our economical configuration of this societal order, and also for the environment? Will we make it?
Will we make it? I don't know. I don't know if we will. And I work every day so that we will, but I also know every day as I'm working towards it that maybe we won't. So I can hold those two simultaneously and still know that what I'm trying to do is how I want to spend my time and what I believe to be the right thing to do. And part of me, and I understand that, Nate Hagen says it's a great simplification coming, and lots of people will say that this civilization is over. It may morph into something different, or it may just collapse. And that's my understanding. Like business as usual is done. It's not going to be like this in 10 or 20 years. We can either allow it, keep going until we reach collapse, or we can plan for something, a softer landing, perhaps, through degrowth. So things are just going to be so different. And, I hope that we get like a collective, conscious awakening, I guess is maybe one way to say it, where we start to realize that this way of living is not normal or sustainable or even necessary to live a good life, and that we can change things and salvage some things. That's where my efforts are directed this time. So whether we do or not, chances are we won't. But I think that in the work that I'm trying to do, and lots of people in the space are trying to do, a lot of the outcomes are useful, whether it's collapse or it's a planned soft landing, i.e. degrowth. So, some of these things that we're trying to do, like creating communities and making people aware of low-tech solutions and other ways of living, community gardens, these sorts of things are useful even if we don't do the things that we should be doing at the time we should be doing them. So they still feel like, making people aware of them is a good use of our time.
Can you please walk us through the title, Degrowth? A lot of people are addicted to growth. This is the way we have learned to behave. This is the ideas that we have learned to believe. This is the political discussion, the political discourse every day. This is why our political parties are fighting for, and also why superpowers are fighting for growth. How would the degrowth paradigm work, and what would that mean for the ordinary citizen, for the ordinary person, for me and you?
I mean, for the ordinary person, I think there's some really cool things under a degrowth economy that we could achieve. So a reduction in the working week, so 3 to 4 days instead of the current 5 days. We could have a job guarantee funded by a currency issuing nation. So, no longer do we have to work in the private sector because that's where the jobs are, but the government would become employer of last resort, meaning that if we're looking for work, we can work for our government, and so the government would fund it, but the roles would be determined at the community level. So if you want to teach kids to swim, go for it. If you want to teach kids to surf, maybe go for it. If you want to retrain, that now becomes something you can get paid to do. If you have young children at home, perhaps that is what now is a paid work, because it's paid when we get someone else to look after our children. So potentially our government can pay us to look after our children. All of these things are possible, and would actually make life better for a lot of people. A big degrowth tenet is providing the citizenship with universal public services. So now everyone should have access to healthcare, education, high quality public transport, a quota of energy, water, internet, secure housing for everyone. Maybe there's community food gardens everywhere, or I don't know, rations for certain amounts of food. Like just taking away the things that people need, or the commodification of things that people need to live a good life, frees up so much space for people to explore other things with their life, rather than relentlessly working to pay for the things that we can provide for free to citizens. So there's a lot of good things in a degrowth economy. Obviously, it's not all good. Some of the things that we've come to think are normal, even though they're not normal in the full period of human history, would go. So we'd have to wind down the use of fossil fuels, and that means a lot of things. Like it means less aviation, it means less driving, it means changing the way the energy is supplied to our house, and really looking at ways to use less energy even in our homes. It means less industry. And this should all be determined democratically, but do we need, I don't know, as many cars as we have on the road? Do we need armaments? Do we need massive big houses? I don't know how you find it in Greece, but in Australia, we knock down these perfectly fine homes to build a McMansion on them, and they aren't very efficient. And there's no energy ratings around them. Like we're just wasting resources at a time when we shouldn't be doing that. So that would be the less comfortable side of degrowth for people. But, there's this quote from Donella Meadows from, I think it's from the 1990s, when she was looking into systems change. And she said, we'd start to meet our immaterial needs immaterially. And it's like, oh, it's so true. Like we're trying to meet all these immaterial needs at the moment with material goods. And I don't think it's any coincidence that the rates of happiness aren't that high, and there's lots of depression, and it's not all harmonious just because we have more things. I think we're just failing to address the underlying issues that we see in our community, and maybe we can actually focus on those things rather than just trying to make things better with more material items.
Well, I totally agree with you, but the problem is that what you are advocating for presupposes that we change our social structures, we change our economical systems, consumption-based psychology, and also invested interest on consumption, marketing, propaganda, which are essential tools for creating and maintaining this societal structure. You're advocating actually for a change of all things.
Yeah, and like even the IPCC says that when they released their report. So that the is it AR6 or whatever it's called was released, I think this time last year or early last year, and they're literally saying that every part of society needs to change if we're to do what's needed to avoid catastrophic warming. And I don't think many people need to have this clarified, but I'm going to do it anyway. When they're talking catastrophic warming, we're talking like tipping points in the climatic system. When we reach those tipping points, we can't undo what we're about to do. So this one, the one I'm about to mention, we won't reach probably until the 2050-ish. There's always a chance we could do it sooner because we're really giving a good hot go. But if we lost the ice sheets in Antarctica, we're talking 50 meters of sea level rise. Like it won't happen in this century. We'll get a couple of meters this century, but it will happen eventually. And there's nothing we can do to unwind that. And I don't understand how we're not moving heaven and earth to make sure that doesn't happen. Like 50 meters of sea level rise. Everywhere that I am now, so I'm at 10 meters of sea level, above sea level here, like it's gone. How are we okay with that? Because we like some technologies. Like that seems irresponsible to me. And there's more. And then they create feedback loops where you lose the Arctic in a summertime, so it now is a blue surface absorbing heat rather than a white ice surface reflecting heat back into the atmosphere. And now all of a sudden there's more warming because this huge expanse is absorbing more heat. And so it's really very serious. Like the scientists are saying we're in the 6th mass extinction. So yes, I'm advocating for a lot of change, but there's no reason why these things can't change. They're all human created systems, unlike the laws of nature, which aren't going to change. So I acknowledge the human systems are going to be difficult to change, but at least we can if we put enough effort behind them. What won't change is what happens when you put, I don't know, 500 parts per million of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Like that, we all like, there's 5 prior mass extinctions that will help us know what happens when we do that. So yes, a lot of change, but possible.
I agree with you, but I'd like to play a little bit the devil's advocate here. We don't cope well with change. Our biological substratum that created this trajectory of the human species during the last 300,000 years has denial dialed in, has cognitive dissonance dialed in. The very structures of our brains are based on neurons and synapses that takes energy to create. So whenever we need to create new concepts, new ideas, and navigate our actions through those new concepts, we need to destroy old neurons and create new synapses. That takes energy. And through our evolutionary path, our organism knew that if we're going to destroy all neurons to create new ones, this energy imbalance might be missing when we're going to face a predator or a natural catastrophe. So we are predisposed not to like change. And we see that whenever big change happens to our environment, we respond with violence. We are a very violent species. So I'm afraid that whenever it comes to fundamental change that we need to do in order to survive, we are not biologically, we don't have the biological substratum infrastructure to sustain this change. We need to overcome ourselves. We can understand it logically, but emotionally we are not ready to do it. So where do you think we should start? Because I don't find a lot of solutions when it comes to people of our age, of older ages, but maybe we can start from your children, from the young generation. They are much more easy to handle, to understand new concepts and navigate their life. But if we do that, then we don't have the time.
Yeah.
We don't have the time. You see, I cannot find a solution. I'm just posing there the predicament, because this is a wicked problem, actually. The more we try to solve it, the more problems we create.
Yeah, it is. It's you know, basically as bad as it comes when it comes to a problem that we can solve. You know, our actions today don't get felt for decades into the future. You know, it's in contrast to exactly how we're living our lives at the moment. So we don't like change. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, there's definitely some truth to that. But also, like, we haven't been living these lifestyles forever. So as you mentioned earlier, the Great Acceleration, that's Professor Will Stephan, I believe. He's an Earth system scientist, and he says that most of the changes that we see both in the social systems and in ecological systems started in 1950s when we adopted GDP as our predominant economic measure. So what, 74 years ago, like it's less than a human lifetime that most of these changes have been happening. So the idea that we couldn't even go back to how we were living 2 generations ago is, we've changed in that time. And so we could change back if we wanted to, it doesn't, the 1950s weren't horrendous. And we're not actually advocating to go back to how we're living in the 1950s. There's so many improvements in energy efficiency and technology that we just have to reduce our ecological footprint back to that time, not necessarily our lifestyles need to go back to that time. And there's some cool examples of when change has happened, and actually it's people have not thrived, that's not the right word. There's been a sense of community spirit that has helped people through those times. So I tend to use the example of the US when they entered World War II. And there was posters around everywhere saying, grow your own food and use less so that we can give them more, and car share because we're saving fuel for the military or whatever, or we don't want to use too many tires because we need that for military vehicles, and that was the sense of camaraderie and patriotism and community people were able to engage with and probably thrive on, and that actually sense of sufficiency lasted for many decades and had to be broken down by corporations who wanted people to consume more so they could grow their profits. Like that culture, and it was the same here in the US, Australia, and probably in Europe as well, where people didn't want to use more than they needed because it was wasteful. They didn't want to be a part of that culture. And then if we need a more recent example, like things changed a lot in 2020, and not all of it was good. And it wasn't the way we're asking for things to change during, if we were to implement degrowth, we want communities together, not separated in lockdown. That's not the sort of changes we're advocating for. But people, like it is possible for things to change quickly, and for most of the world to adopt these new ways of being, even if it's temporary, until we can move through it and figure out what comes next.
So how do we do it? Because there is, please tell us a little bit about the social tipping points and how we can achieve them. We know right now that we don't need to convince 51% of the society, but we need to convince 25% of the society. Why is that? And how can we push the right information in order to convince them to become the advocates of the big changes that we need in the 21st century fast and efficiently?
Yeah, so we launched Project Tipping Point earlier in January of this year. We really with the effort of trying to reach these social tipping points that we're talking about. So I referred to climate tipping points earlier, of which there are sort of 15 that scientists have their eyes very much on and report back on. But there's also social tipping points. And I feel like the work I can be doing at this point in time is trying to reach that social tipping point where, the seemingly politically impossible becomes the politically inevitable. And, minority views quickly become majority views. And you mentioned this, that there's a tipping point around 25% of the
You seem to have frozen, Erin. I cannot hear you. What happened? Well, something went bad with the connection, most probably. Let's see if Erin can dial back up again. I don't know what happened.
Yeah, sorry, I think that was me. My internet went, I don't know why. Apologies.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, I'm gonna cut it afterwards in the montage.
Okay. Sorry.
Let's go forward with the tipping points.
Yeah, so social tipping points, they've happened in the past, and really they can happen again. So examples of of social tipping points is like the remarkably swift move away from smoking as being socially desirable. So, you know, there were times where it's cool and fine and normal to smoke on an airplane, or to smoke in an office building, or in an elevator. In a restaurant, it's quite normal to smoke. In a car with small children, all of these things aren't normal anymore. And so, you know, that awareness of the harm of smoking caught on, and people didn't want to be around it. Other examples is the sort of the move away from homophobia in many Western countries, and marriage equality, how quickly that happens. Even the example of the fall of the USSR is an example of a social tipping point in many ways. People just got fed up with the status quo and want to change. The Arab Spring in 2011, you know, the civil rights movement in the 1960s in the US, the suffragettes, and women winning the right to vote. These are all examples of when society has tipped from one direction into another, and they all tend to look like they're not making enough progress and nothing's going quick enough, and then all of a sudden everything happens really quickly, and in many countries around the world. So that's really where I'm trying to put my efforts at the moment. And so I'm researching how social tipping points have been reached in the past, and it's really actually quite fascinating. It doesn't happen the way you think it does. So this is not about getting a couple of big influencers to take our cause on and to spread it out to their millions of followers. Actually, they're probably not likely to do that. There's too much risk for these people to take on something like this, because they've got lots of people around them that are protecting them and making them stay within the status quo. Where change will happen and where we should drive it from is called the periphery. So just average, everyday people who have a normal sized network, you start to incubate new values or new behaviors in these peer groups and normalize things. And slowly you do that in larger and larger peer groups until they catch on, and it becomes what's called a snowball effect, where it just gets larger and larger and larger and becomes unstoppable. And you start to reach this critical threshold where it just takes off and spreads. And that's, you know, things like Twitter, that's how it caught on, and Facebook and these things. It wasn't Oprah saying everyone should use Twitter. She caught onto it after it had already become massive. So, you know, really what you're trying to do is get your new value or new behavior, new worldview that we're trying to create to such a point that influencers want to get behind it. And it's going to come from the periphery, from everyday people caring and speaking out and trying to embed these new values within their networks.
Does education play a role in it? Does mass media play a role in it? Is it a top-down approach or a bottom-up approach?
Look, I genuinely don't think mass media will get involved here. I think that mass media is a form of cultural hegemony, and they won't be very useful. So it'll be about independent media and independent journalism and activists really spreading the word that way. So no, I don't think they play a big role. But yes, I think that otherwise education is really important. And, you know, reading and learning and sharing what you're reading and learning and helping people along that way. But also it's a little bit psychological. Like, you know, there's a psychological term called homophilia, and it's just where we like to be around people like us. And so what happens is that the status quo is comfortable, and we're around people who have the same values as us. And as those new values start to be adopted around a few more of our friends, then it's a little bit more normalized, and we'll feel comfortable adopting those new values and behaviors. And then, you know, everyone switches because they want to be part of the status quo. Like, it just is, you know, you might know more about this than I do, but it comes from our tribal days where we want to fit in because literally our life's at stake if we don't. And it still feels that way, you know, even though our life's not at stake now, if we don't fit in, it has that really uncomfortable feeling that we get in our body if we're feeling socially isolated. So it's part of that. And things that give a movement credibility is seeing a movement or a value or a behavior, whatever we're trying to embed, adopted by lots of different people. So if it's just a bunch of greenies, not that there's anything wrong with being a greenie, talking about climate, it's a little bit easy to go, oh, well, that's over there, that's those people. But if CEOs of a company start talking about it, or mums and dads start talking about it, or school teachers, different parts of society start mentioning it, then you start going, oh, hang on, it's not just those greenies over there, it's, this must be a big deal. So just it's about reaching lots of different people, and lots of different people speaking up and trying to reach lots of different people and creating that cascading effect.
But what is your experience from your social surrounding, from your social periphery? Are people ready to make these hard discussions? Because sometimes I feel that I cannot even bring these subjects to the family table. Nobody wants to listen. It's too scary. It's actually frightening to discuss about the climate catastrophe that we see it is coming. If we are not going to change our attitudes massively, really fast.
Yeah, and I think that at the moment, sometimes it's just about planting seeds. So we might mention it to people, and they might not, like, it's just painful. Like, it gives you brain ache when you hear some of these things, because it's not nice news. But so we're planting seeds, and then I think that as you and I both know, like, the climate is going to make some of these conversations even harder to turn away from as it gets worse and worse. And there will be a threshold where people can't just stand back and watch it happening. And it's not even just the climactic events. It's this system, this endless growth system, and it's capitalism, which requires endless growth, is really squeezing people. So the wealthy get wealthier. And this is not a fault in the system. This is the system working as designed. And the poorer get poorer and poorer. And that so far we've been able to tolerate it, but there's going to be a point where people just go, I can't do this anymore. Like, what am I working 2 jobs 6 days a week for if I can't even put food on the table? So having these conversations and helping people understand that there's a different way we could be living, it could precipitate some of the bigger movements that we need to see happen.
Yes. Now you touch a really touchy subject that I like to speak about: capitalism. The way we have configured our societies, and I've been watching yesterday an interview of Steve Keenan, an English professor of economics, and he was telling he can define economics as an error after error.
Yeah.
He's an economic historian, actually. And he explains in this interview with Nate Hagens in the Great Simplification podcast how economists got it wrong from the very beginning, from Adam Smith, when he discarded energy as a substantial means of the economic system, energy in the society also as a social mean of social power transferring. So the whole configuration of the economic field is based on error after error. GDP, it was, I think, who was it? Daniel Schmachtenberger, who has said that we should not speak about GDP, but GDP, gross domestic burning, or Nate Hagens, it could be. Gross domestic burning, because for each specific unit of product, we have a corresponding price of burning, of energy burning, which creates emissions, which creates damage, pollution, and then at the end, collapse. But we do not seem to value the right things through this error after error for 250, 300 years, which has confused our minds, and our behavior and our actions are created from our minds. When we have based our thinking on confused ideas, where our behavior is going to be confused. And I see it today at the social level, but also at the international level. When we see we need to limit down the emissions, we have wars after wars, which are boosting our ecological footprint.
Yeah.
The destruction of the Nord Stream created in a single day the emissions of a whole year. And it was a destruction of one project. And right now I see wars, becoming more and more widespread, which is a sign for me that the general understanding of the big issues of the 21st century are collapsing. And if we don't have one same worldview, but we have a lot of different worldviews for the same world, then we're never going to reach the necessary decisions and the necessary actions. Because we need to understand that we're a superorganism. The human species is a superorganism. But it is missing, obviously, the prefrontal cortex, the decision-making center. We are not in the driving seat. We are behaving like an infant.
Yep.
How do you see us going through this phase? Because we need to become an adult super organism super fast.
Yeah, what I try and remember is that, you know, sort of after World War II, there were lots of democratically elected socialists and, you know, some instances like communist governments elected by the citizenships in various countries in Europe and in Latin and South America and Asia. Like we want to look after people, like we value our social relationships and we value meeting the needs of citizens over capital growth. That is what that tells me. And then I just remind myself that through the latter half of the 20th century, the US and its Western allies couped or violently intervened in 55 of those mostly democratic, mostly socialist governments because they wanted to protect their interests. So that tells me that this way of living is not necessarily a result of our inherent greed or, you know, sort of desire for more. It's been placed on us violently in lots of cases to further.
In Greece, we lived
system.
that through a 7-year dictatorship back in the 70s.
Yeah, correct. I'm aware. And so this way of living serves a very small minority of people, and they want it to continue to be this way, but there's many more of us than there is of them. And if we can get the people power, you know, that's the only thing that's going to change this. You know, just hoping that, and it's not simple. It's not a matter of voting for Democrats over Republicans or Labour in the UK. Like all of those parties want the same thing. They want further destruction of the planet. They're following neoliberal ideology. Like they're not the solution. It's going to be so much bigger and harder than that. But it starts with people caring and standing up and acting like citizens and doing what we need to do.
Yes, and this being a citizen nowadays seems to become disconnected with expressing your voice through votes and connecting with new kinds of democratic and political activism with writing or with abstaining from voting. We see abstention becoming larger and larger part of a society.
Yeah.
But then the elites see that they keep doing what they're doing. They are not bothered to care about the widening of the abstention from our democratic systems. Well, this may be a sign of hope or a sign of despair. How do you see it?
Yeah, look, I don't know. I often feel like we've forgotten that we're citizens. Like we've become so much that we're either consumers or we're employees. So we're worried about how we spend or don't spend our money or how we earn or don't earn our money, that we forget that we've got all this power in just actually standing up and working as a community and trying to get local initiatives up or trying to get a new person to run for local membership into the parliament, whatever it might be. Like I feel like this is a really neglected area, and I think it's again a little bit of cultural hegemony where we sit down and we watch Netflix at night instead of getting up and doing something active. And I think that's all part of the system too. Like we're exhausted because we've worked a 10 or 8 hour day or whatever, and we just don't have the mental bandwidth for it. But nothing good is going to happen until we all start to work together for that to happen. Yeah, I mean, yes, I get what you're saying. Like I think it'll all fall apart before it gets a lot better. And I think when it gets better, it won't look like it does today. I think it'll look like more local economies and more local decision making in communities rather than these big nation states.
Yes,
probably.
agree. Let me take you to another subject. New technologies, communication technologies, mass communication, AI, artificial intelligence. I've been reading the other day a paper from ILO, International Labour Organization. They have calculated that within the next 8 years, 13,000 professions out of 13,400 that they have studied are going to vanish. They are going to be replaced. So it's something like 97.8%. So this is a societal challenge on its own sake. What do you do with societies that don't have use for the people? How do you think we can handle with this big question of AI? There are the doomers there and the optimists there. They believe that the optimists believe that the AI is going to change all our problems, including climate change problems. But then you have the doomers that are afraid that AI is going to destroy us. It's going to become super intelligent, and it's going to be the next phase in the evolutionary process of the human race. What's your take on AI?
Yeah, look, it's a good question. I think AI. Look, I think it has a place, and I think it's the thought of it taking people's jobs for me doesn't terrify me. I think that this notion around work being the be all and end all to who we are is, it's sort of something that people 200 years ago wouldn't understand. They were like, what is it with you guys and your obsession with working and working harder and more? And so, if AI takes some jobs, that's okay, as long as we're supporting people. We could reduce the working week and share the remaining jobs around and everyone could work less. Like, that doesn't sound terrible to me. I have to admit, I don't spend a lot of time looking at AI. It's just, I don't know, maybe I should. My real interest at the moment is in low technology. Are you familiar with low technology?
Yes,
Yeah,
of course.
I
I love it.
it's so cool. So that's probably where I've spent my time rather than with AI. But you're right, AI is
I
probably
agree, but the big money are going to AI, yeah. And also not only the big money, the big resources. For AI to function, it needs huge amounts of energy and huge amounts of water.
Yeah, it's crazy. I know.
It is crazy. And what is another also interesting question concerning AI is that they stay quite outside any democratic control. It was just a week ago that Zuckerberg was at the US Congress apologizing for a lot of children having committed suicide in front of their parents, but nothing changed afterwards. He just say, okay, guys, sorry, you lost your children. Business as usual.
Yeah, I know. You do start to wonder, what does it take for actual genuine change to happen? Because it seems like nothing changes, particularly in the US. Like, doesn't matter how many people die of violent gun deaths, like the gun laws don't change. And I do. I understand, and I understand the threat too. Yeah. It's all related. It's those levers of power need to change. We need to get more of so there's political democracy, which we sort of have now, not really, because there's so much money in politics. But there's also economic democracy, and we don't have economic democracy really anywhere at the moment. So we don't decide what gets made. We don't get to decide, how much of it, at what price. Do we need it? No, probably not. Like, that's where citizens' assemblies should come in and decide, is this something that is good for us? Is it using more resources than we have availability? Like, if it is, it doesn't make sense in an ecological crisis. It all comes back to engaged citizenship again, what we're saying. So, yeah.
Thank you. Do you think this kind of change will come through an evolutionary phase or a revolutionary phase?
Look, I believe in humans, and I think it will come through a revolutionary phase. I think that we'll get it together and we'll push back and we'll take control of the things that we need to take control of. Maybe I'm a dreamer, but yeah, I don't know. I just think that the alternative is really horrendous, and I find it hard to believe that anyone would want. If I imagine when you're saying in the evolutionary phase that we're talking about the sixth mass extinction and what might survive after that. Is that what you mean by that? Yeah. I mean, and there's going to be lots of things that we can't avoid. Lots of damage that we can't avoid now, and I'm not naive to that, but we can still save most of it, is what I understand from the scientists. And so I hope that we get our act together and do that.
What's the feedback that you are getting from your posts? Let me inform our viewers that you have been recently been recognized as the #1 influencer on LinkedIn.
No, I was the most read writer on online sustainability page, illuminem. Is that what you're referring to? Yeah. So no, that's been good. It was the same in 2022 as well. So it's just encouraging to know that people are reading my work and sharing it, and it's resonating with people. That just makes me happy to know that I can use my voice to reach people. That's essentially what I'm aiming to do. So yeah, that feels really good.
Do people reach out to you? What is the feedback that you are getting from people reading your work?
Yeah, no, lots of people reach out to me, and I've gotten, this podcast is an example of what's come through my writing, and a following on LinkedIn, 31,000 followers at the moment. So that is just helping me to amplify the messages from people who I think have something worth hearing. So sometimes that's my writing, and often it's other experts that I like to share with people, so that I can play my role in educating people, I guess.
What about your government, your institutions? Do they reach out? You have obviously a lot to say about environmental issues, a lot to say about how our societies should be organized. Do you have any kind of contact with your government? Do your institutional bodies bother you at all?
No, I don't hear from them. Occasionally or often they hear from me when I'm not happy about something, and I write to them, but no, they're not reaching out to me at this point.
Well, isn't that a sign of our times? People that really have something to say, and that they reach people with their writings, with their wordings, with their ideas, are not recognized from our institutional bodies.
Yeah, look, I think times have changed a lot. Like we collectively in Australia worked really hard to try and create change. So we had a right-wing government for 9 years, and everything was going in the wrong direction. And lots of volunteers, like tens of thousands of volunteers, managed to get independent candidates, so not one of our two major parties, or green candidates elected into parliament. And it created a really big shift, unfortunately not big enough. And our Labor Party maintained a majority government. But you work that hard and you still have this government that essentially does what big business wants it to do. Like, it's just state capture. It doesn't matter who's in power. They all essentially make the same decisions. And so, look, I think it's all part of the process of things are going to get worse before enough people realize that things are as bad as they are, and we might start to do something about it. And there's a really cool phrase I like. It's a quote by Rupert Reed, who's head of the Climate Majority Project. And he says the step one is that when people realize things are quite bad, and step two is when they realize that everyone else realizes that things are quite bad, and that's when change starts to happen. So maybe we're at phase 1 now, and the work to do is to get us to phase 2, where we start to, I feel like we're in this Groundhog Day of everyone gets up and does essentially the same thing every day, and we just need to kick that habit and start to create some change and change direction a little bit, start doing things differently.
Do deniers, climate change deniers, reach out to you? Do you have some punchback?
Look, I'm pretty good at blocking people when they're. I don't block if they just deny the science. I let that go. I think that's useful for people to see, and usually there's a pretty effective counter argument. Like the science is pretty clear. It doesn't take much to refute a denialist. But I do get some pretty unkind comments, and I just block them. I just don't think they're really worth spending time on.
Yes, but we see also this kind of polarization between actually logic and illogic argumentation being incorporated in our political systems. Right now, the political discussion is in the US especially, which is the most powerful nation our history ever knew, ever met. The political discussion is because between two different ends, is so deep and so hardwired in the American society, they cannot really speak logically to each other. And this creates actually a havoc to the world, because nobody knows the consequences if the American economy and the American polity, the state, is going to collapse. Who is going to control their armory? Nobody knows. Who is going to control their nuclear weapons? Nobody knows. Who is going to control their interests around the world? Nobody knows. But we know from systems thinking that whenever entropic forces are multiplied, systems collapse.
Yeah.
Or they reach a new homeostasis after a violent phase of reconstruction. So how do you see this knowledge that we have today contributing to overcoming these entropic forces, which I feel they are multiplying? And with this environmental communication environment that we have created, they are multiplying and they are affecting all other constituent parts. They are toxic for the system.
Yeah, like these are huge issues. And I always come back to the same thing. It's about grassroots democracy and community building. And so one of the things that can make reaching people, like effective communication, difficult is holding on to biases. So the idea that someone is better, or someone you're more prepared to invest time in someone because they're a Democrat rather than a Republican, stops you having an effective conversation with them, and it's breaking down those biases. But it's also recognizing that this binary, this polarizing position of people is useful for those who want to maintain the status quo and who are benefiting from the system as it is. Like a lot of the billionaires, like the social media owners, love it. Their algorithms set up to pit people against each other. So yeah, it's more conversations. It's more being willing to speak to people who might have opposing views to us, and not holding on to this idea that they're only worth speaking to if they have similar views to us. This bias thing is actually really harmful, and the research I've seen into it has really opened my eyes up to, we can't, labeling people is a big mistake. So deciding that someone will never change because they're a Republican, you're probably missing a really cool opportunity to have a good conversation with them. I haven't got any more than it's going to be people making this better and lots of us working together. Even though the risks are really high and it seems really urgent, there is no other way, I don't think.
Yeah, you actually are living in the urgent needs right now in Australia. I've seen some terrifying temperatures there.
Yeah, Australia's going to be hit the hardest. One of the most affected countries when global warming really accelerates. It's just such a dry, hot continent. We're starting to feel it. Like, I think the maths has just come back and said that last year, or the last 12 months, were 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial times. So, and so it begins. It's only going to get hotter from now.
I've read today, I think it was in either on the Guardian or the Independent, a new study came out for Australia saying that there is 1.5 C above 1910, not even pre-industrial levels. 1910.
Wow. Yeah.
That is 60 years after pre-industrial.
Yeah. So is that like 1.7 that it go above pre-industrial? Is that, is that where we're at now?
Most probably yes. Most probably
Yeah.
yes. Which is
Yeah.
a huge leap.
And you know what? Like, I sort of think, well, not that I want anyone to come to harm, but Australia's been a pretty big contributor to global warming. Like, we've got like 0.3% of the world's population, but we contribute 1.3% of greenhouse gases. When you add in our upstream and downstream emissions and all the fossil fuels we export, it's like literally getting to 4 to 5% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. So, like, if it's sort of you reap what you sow, like, and that's not really fair, but we're going to have to change. And if we want other countries to change, we have to display those behaviors, because you can't ask China to do the right thing while we're still have some of the highest per capita emissions in the entire world. So yeah.
How do people in Australia cope with these high temperatures this summer, nowadays, last week?
Yeah,
what are they saying?
We're a pretty wealthy country. People retreat into their air-conditioned homes and they don't experience the heat like many other countries would. So, and that's not true of everywhere, but many places would have access to like pools, and a lot of the new builds are air conditioned, even though they're not energy efficient. So that is one of the things I learned very early on is that if you want to do something about climate change, you should start to experience the climate in which you live. And exactly. So sometimes when it's hot, like, I don't put the air on because I want to know how hot it is, but that's not what everyone would be doing, especially sort of in the northern parts of Sydney where I live. But even further north, like my dad lives in far north Queensland, and it gets very hot up there. He has an air conditioner going on every day. Like, it's a solar powered air conditioner, but that's how he escapes the heat. And he's an older man who's had a stroke, so I don't begrudge him that. Like, I'm not saying he shouldn't, but that is how a lot of people do cope with the heat around here, and that's problematic because air conditioners release greenhouse gases into the atmosphere as well, just through their air conditioning unit. So our means of coping with this extreme heat is a feedback loop.
Yes, well, we live in Greece. Here in Greece, ordinary temperature for winter was, I don't know, 0, 5 degrees, -5. That was my life experience. This year, during the Christmas, it was 22 degrees C. I've been to the beach.
Wow, that's hot.
Yes, but when I discussed that, the feedback that I was getting is, aren't you happy?
Yeah.
We burn less oil. We don't need to have so much expenses in order to have our homes warm. Aren't you happy? I'm not so sure how this resonates with people all around the world.
Yeah, no, I mean, you often see the same thing, like when they have a warm day in the UK, what the mainstream media put on the front of their newspaper is people sunning themselves in Hyde Park. And you're like, no, this is terrifying. This is not something to celebrate. But that's mainstream media as well. Like, it turns a blind eye to what the actual real issues are and what the focus should be. It's not people eating ice cream down by the beach. It's the fire hazards and the wildlife that can't survive those high temperatures.
Erin, I know you have to go. I know you have 3 children, so we have to wrap it up. I know your time is limited. So if you would send a message to the world, to Europe, to Greece, to the West, and not to the rest, what that would be in a phrase or two? What's the most essential thing we should know and we should do?
I just think that we all have a power. There's a skill we can bring to the table that can help us move in the direction we need to move. For me, I prefer to write, but some people love, talking, or they're an amazing photographer or an artist, or, they just love speaking with other people. And I think that we can all use that skill to act as citizens and start to embed the new worldview and values and behaviors that we need to do. So I would encourage everyone to look within themselves and see what that might be.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So thank you for your time. Let me say that you are welcome to the history of the Metacrisis whenever you feel like it, whenever you feel you have something to say.
Thank you very much.
These podcasts belong to you and to people like you.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Let's all face the Metacrisis together.
Yes, yes, that's going to be the only way to do it, as you know, together. Thank you for having me on. It's
Excellent.
been a pleasure.
Thank you very much, Erin. Bye.
See you later.